The Koch brothers have finally decided that they need to purchase the third branch of government, so they've decided to start funding the state Supreme Court races. And they aren't alone. Corporate money is flowing into judicial races all over the country. I have Howard Nations with me to talk about what this means for our courts and for democracy. You know, Howard, I was actually in Texas trying a 3-month trial when the whole spectrum of the judiciary went to hell. And that was because Karl Rove had the idea of replacing judges all over the country, from Texas to California to New York to Florida, and making them into Republican, conservative, talking head puppets. He was very successful when I was out there trying that case. I think 90% of what you would call the progressive judges were completely thrown out of office. And then he left Texas, and he started doing that all over the country. And the reason he did it, if you look at what he says he wanted to nullify laws that he didn't like. In other words, if legislature writes a law, hell, I've got a judge over here, he's going to overturn it.
That's right. Well, of course, in Texas, he was very successful with it, too, because the Texas Supreme Court is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Republican Party and of the corporate interest in this state. You can't possibly get a fair trial as a plaintiff in a personal injury or malpractice case in Texas, because you may find a favorable jury. You find juries in the Valley or in Austin, in some of the more progressive communities, but it doesn't matter. You get a verdict, it's going to be overturned by the judges that Karl Rove helped put on the Supreme Court and on now virtually every appellate bench in the state. So you're going to lose an independent citizen who gets a verdict is going to lose it in the Supreme Court.
Howard, let me tell you how ugly it is. We had one of our lawyers trying a case out there in Texas. The woman was completely paralyzed. All she could do is move her eyes. There was no question about liability, absolute no question about liability. And the issue came down to one that should have been a jury issue. Okay, in other words, a jury should have decided. A Republican judge that had just been appointed to the court the year before threw the case out. The liability was staggering. I mean, the wrongdoing on the other side was staggering. This woman will never walk again, never talk again. She has to speak with her eyes like Stephen Hawkins. And so this judge threw it out. And as a matter of fact, they tried to appeal it from there. The appellate court said no, it died. And then we come to find out that this judge that George Bush had appointed, her husband was one of George Bush's biggest fundraisers. Yeah. So that is where the judiciary is headed. And unfortunately, you have Karl Rove going throughout the country saying, you know what, I want Texas to be the example of how judges should be all over this country. That's his new talking point, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I'm sure he's absolutely right. That's exactly what he wants, because we have absolutely no justice for the injured parties in the state of Texas anymore. If it ever gets to an appellate court, it's over.
Who are the people behind this? What are the organizations that we need to be aware
of? Well, the
of?
organizations that are behind it, Pap, are the usual suspects. You have the Koch brothers, of course, and then you have the Republican. What's happened is in 2010, after you had the decision in Citizens United, Justice John Paul Stevens, in his dissent in Citizens United, said that decision was going to unleash the floodgates of corporate and union general treasury spending. And now what's happened is exactly that. Money's gone into presidential races, congressional races, gubernatorial races, state legislatures, and we did a bit recently about the state AGs. Now their current target is the judiciary, because if they can elect judges who are pro-corporate, pro-conservative, they can successfully legislate from the bench.
Okay,
which is
so
exactly what they do.
You've got this thing, this RSLC out there that is being paid for by big money donors like the Koch brothers.
Right.
The RSLC is a 501c4. Now, here's where it really gets ugly, and unfortunately, we have an IRS that won't do anything about this, but it's very clear. It's very clear that this 501c4 is put there because they've signed an affidavit that says they will not participate in political action groups. They will not get out and involve themselves in politics. that they are there for positive social change. Now, we find out the RSLC, 90% of their money has gone to judges' races where they're out there saying we need to change politics by way of judges' races. IRS doesn't seem to be willing to do anything. This administration won't do anything. Department of Justice won't do anything because it's a ne'er-do-well Department of Justice. And so this continues just to go on without anybody asking any questions.
Well, the same thing's true with the SGLF, which is a state government leadership foundation, which, for example, in a recent election in Tennessee, judicial election, there was a total of $1.5 million spent on TV ads. $500,000 of that money came from that one organization. They ran attack ads against 3 Democratic judges. And you know, the effect of this type of attack ads that they're now using, which is a standard fare now in these judicial races, is that many of the qualified candidates won't run now because the judicial temperament is considerably different than a political temperament, and there's got to be an effect on fundraising, on the impartiality of judges.
What happens, what we see happening with the studies are the least qualified people end up saying, yeah, I want to be a judge, because you got a guy out there who's nothing more than a Republican political hack, hasn't done anything, intelligent as a judge or as a lawyer. So you got a guy out there making $80,000 a year. He thinks if I run for judge and I win, I maybe can make $100,000. They're terribly, terribly unqualified. They have no experience. They're political hacks being put in place simply because of politics. And unfortunately, they nullify any good legislation that might be protecting the consumer or the victim out there. Isn't that kind of how it works?
It's exactly how it works. The big advantage that corporate money has is that they have the money going in so they can go out and find the compliant candidates that you're talking about who want to be judges. Judges who don't have corporate backing have to get out and dial for dollars, often from attorneys such as you and I, with the potential effect on impartiality. And you got to give it to the Republican Party. They are so far in the lead on this thing. The Democrats are far behind the curve. Democrats have raised 1/3 as much money as the Republicans for statewide races. And again, this year, in 2014, the president of the RSLC, who's Matt Walter, predicts that they're going to spend north of $5 million on judicial races.
Do you remember what that idiot? Do you remember what the idiot Rahm Emanuel said 2 years ago, or 3 years, or maybe 4 years ago? He says, "Judges' races don't matter to Democrats. We don't have anything to worry about. What we need to worry about is the White House and the Senate." And here's the crazy thing: the Senate can write all the laws they want. The president can come forward with ACA. He can come up with environmental laws that are great. He can come up with consumer laws that are great. But then that political hack, that little pimp, the Republican pimp in the black robe that's on the bench because he played the political game, can take all that away with one order. And that's what Karl Rove was talking about, isn't it?
There's one other very big important thing that the judges do too, and that is the Republicans control the United States House of Representatives, and they're likely to retain control for the foreseeable future, despite the fact that they have a 9% approval rating, possibly the worst record in history of any House of Representatives. The reason they'll stay in power is because of redistricting and gerrymandered districts, and the people who grade the papers on the gerrymandered districts are the judges. So that's a very important reason why they want to keep control of the judges.
Howard Nations, thank you for joining me. Another ugly story that nobody's paying attention to. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike.